Hello everyone and welcome back to the VCO Esports studio for take two of what we're hoping is a fascinating dive into the career of one of eNASCAR's greatest. Michael Conti recently wrapped up his tenure at the very top level of sim racing's oval side and joins us once again today. Michael, delighted to have you join us once again. How are you doing on this fine Tuesday?
I'm good. It's good to be back. Hopefully, we can make it through it this week without any technical issues. So, give it our best shot.
Yeah, we were just getting into what I thought was going to be a really fun chat when things came to a close, unfortunately, due to the UK's internet. So let's pick up where we left off, and I guess we were starting by diving into your introduction to the world of motorsport, because I guess a lot of people start by maybe jumping into a video game, watching on TV, but your first experience and memories of motorsports were a little bit of the highs and lows that we have come to experience of us all. Sorry.
Yeah, they weren't. It wasn't really a positive first memory. I mean, I'm sure I watched a race before the 2001 Daytona 500. I just don't remember it because there wasn't like a massive tragedy that happened. So yeah, like first vivid memory I have of NASCAR is my dad coming into the room and telling me, "Okay, we've got to take the number three little diecast car and we've got to put it up in the shelf. We're retiring the car. You can't play with it anymore." And then I started crying. I don't know if I was crying because I was losing the car and I didn't quite understand why, or if like I actually understood what happened to Dale. I'm not sure what I was able to process back then and what I wasn't able to, but still, first memory wasn't that great. But that was definitely my introduction into motorsports as a whole with NASCAR. And then, yeah, I mean, I can remember just watching some races casually in 2002, 2003, pulling for Dale Jr. Not sure how I became a Dale Jr. fan, but seemed like everybody was. So I guess I hopped on the bandwagon and never hopped off. But definitely didn't start great. But all these years later, it's been a huge part of my life, been extremely positive. So thankful that that I got introduced and made a career out of it.
And from that tragedy actually, it's quite interesting that it kind of comes full circle at the end of your NASCAR career. But we'll get more into that in a moment's time, because your introduction into the world of iRacing, I think, came through where a lot of people come. You hear a real world driver talk about iRacing and you get curious and you jump into the sim racing world.
Yeah, so back to Dale again. So followed him since 2002. I think it was like a practice broadcast in late 2009 when he started talking about this new sim that he was on, and it came from NASCAR 2003, which I was familiar with from many years before that. And at the time, I was a console player. I was running in some leagues on the PS3 with NASCAR '09, which was like the best thing you could do at that time. There wasn't really anything great out there in the late 2000s. So anyway, I was doing that, and I was doing okay with that. But I always wanted to take the next step and see where the competition was, and I felt like there wasn't really much more of a ceiling on the console side. So when I heard about iRacing and I started researching it, just pulling up random YouTube videos of late models at the big Charlotte Oval. Like back then, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity in what you could do on the sim, but it was definitely cool. I would see like Dale running and Allmendinger and all these guys back then, all these guys that I looked up to were on there. So the thought that I could race with them at some point was really cool, especially for a kid like I was. But barrier to entry was a little bit more difficult than console stuff. So it took a while to get PC and equipment to actually make a go at it. But late 2009, with a laptop and a bar stool and my rig turned toward it instead of being turned toward the TV with the PS3, I started to make a go at it. Upgraded the equipment over time slowly, and eventually found out I was decent. Never really knew where it would take me. If I'd get to the pro level, definitely looked up to those guys and wanted to get there. But rather quickly got up to that level and made a name for myself and did that for over a decade. So it's kind of a cool story to look back on. And like you said, full circle, right? So first memory being Dale Sr., finally getting to drive for Dale Jr. all those years later, having him introduce me to the sim. So it's kind of neat how that worked out, I think.
And it was a pretty quick, I think, transition from jumping into iRacing to getting into the top levels of eNASCAR, because late 2009 is when I think you really started to jump into the sim. And
Yep.
2011 is the first year that you ran a World Championship race. 2012, of course, your first full-time campaign. What were those first couple of years like for you? I don't think you had any sort of real-world experience, even in a kart,
Mhm.
because, so I'm guessing there was a little bit of racecraft that you're learning as well. But I'm guessing in that period you're also developing the skills that have carried you forward as a setup builder as well.
Yeah, so at the time I was I guess I was a little bit younger than I should have been when I got on. So I was 12. You're supposed to be 13, but hopefully we're past the statute of limitations so I can say that. But it's kind of like when you go from middle school to high school. Like when you're in middle school, you're a big fish in a small pond, then you go to high school, small fish, big pond sort of thing. And while I was doing that in real life, I kind of had the same experience going from console NASCAR gaming where I was like the guy. I was winning a bunch of races. Success came pretty easily. I didn't really feel like there was anything that I didn't do well at the time. And then jumping into iRacing, legend cars back then, South Boston, Lanier, quickly realized that I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And I was kind of expecting that going into it because I felt like there was more competition out there. But yeah, there was a lot to learn. Like even just having to drive from inside the car in the cockpit view, something as trivial as that, or as trivial as it may sound, was a huge thing to adjust to. And then just having all of these different pit stop adjustments and strategies and shorter races to start, but then they ended up being longer eventually as I climbed up the license ranks and all that. So it was just a huge learning experience where I felt like I was learning something new every race I did. And the great thing was like you weren't always racing against the same people like I had been before. So you could get into one race and feel like you were best of the best, and then you'd get into the next race with a higher strength of field, which I didn't know too much about at the time, and you would be like, "Oh my God, I still suck. There's still more that I need to learn or do." So yeah, definitely learn the hard way. And back then, there were no setup shops, there were no massive teams or driver academies. It was really everybody for themselves. Like you had to learn. You had to try to pick up on what people were doing around you on the track. Like we talked about briefly, you could go to the forums and pick up a lot of good information. You could get some setups too. Back then they were free, so quite a bit different than it is now. And just try to take that setup, which probably wasn't that great, but at least it was a baseline, and build on it. There were no fixed races either, so you had to learn what the garage did if you wanted to be somewhat competitive in the higher splits. So that forced me to learn more about the garage. So I built on that over time, and that definitely helped me when I got to the Coke series because at that point I could be self-sufficient, right? I didn't have to rely on anybody to build the setups for me. Obviously, teamwork is huge, collaboration is huge, strength in numbers, but uh, because it wasn't easy starting and nothing was really handed to me, I think it made me a better driver in Coke, had a better understanding of setups, and then now I can translate that into the work I do with EPI and give some of that back to the community and teach them, but also try to take some of that harder stuff off their plate too, so those guys can just focus on racing. So give them a little bit different experience than I did, but still try to share what I've learned over the years and help them grow and develop as well.
And that pipeline as well to get to the World Championship looks so different now than it did all those years ago. What are your memories like going back to 2011 when this will also be quite foreign to people that have only watched the eNASCAR Coca-Cola iRacing series in recent years. Drivers, there were 40 drivers or whatever that were the regular full-time drivers, and then sometimes there were some extra drivers that would come in to fill the field. You got your opportunity at the end of 2011 at Phoenix. What were your memories going into that very first World Championship race? How were you feeling?
Yeah,
How confident were you about how your
not at
chances
all.
were?
Not at all. I was scared as could be going into that because these were guys that I had watched for a couple of years to that point, and I knew how good they were. And I'd run against them in random A opens and things, and I would hold my own. But your Richard Towler, your Derek Wood, Tom Lewandowski, like all of those names that are probably extremely foreign to most people on the sim now, like those guys were the Casey Kerwins of the day. Those guys were the Steven Wilsons. All of the guys that you see now dominating anything they drive on oval. These were the guys back then. So yeah, first race, I had to qualify into it. So I had my pro license from season one of that year. The whole pipeline, like you said, which was much different. So basically, season 1, 2, and 3 of 2011, each season would take, I think it was 10 or 12 from the point standings, like top 10 or 12, and you would get a pro license. So I made it in season 1. I was the last one to make it. There were some, I guess I could talk about it now. There were some shenanigans to get back in, which is pretty funny. Like you used to stack races at like 3 o'clock in the morning to bring the strength of field up and get more points. Like we did a lot of shady stuff back then. But it's kind of funny to look back on now. Obviously, it worked out. But anyway, so I had my pro license. I had to qualify in for Phoenix in the DWC series later that year, and I did. I qualified like eighth or something, which I didn't expect to qualify that well at all. It's like, okay, maybe I'm not as awful as I think I am compared to these guys. And then the race got started, and I felt like a rock, and I think I ended up wrecking at some point. I didn't really make it too far, and I did not attempt any more DWC races until the following year in 2012 when I actually had my license and felt like I was ready to go. And that was kind of a thing I did coming up through the ranks. Like I would try not to go to the next license level or go to the next car without feeling like I had mastered the one before it. And I think me qualifying for that DWC race when I was still a pro, that kind of went against my philosophy. And I think the results spoke to that as well. So definitely a good learning moment at that point. And I tried to carry that into the next year and not wreck too much in 2012.
You say that, but it's not like there was a lot of time between that one race in 2011 and jumping into the start of the 2012 campaign where you first finished fourth, then third, and then second. It was a really
Yeah.
strong start to your first full rookie season, and a season where you went on to challenge for the championship and ended up finishing in second behind Ray Alfalo. How
Yep.
much really changed in just a couple of months?
I don't know. I don't think the cars changed too much. So, interestingly enough, when I made pro and I got my pro license, we were still on the original iRacing tire model at that point. And if you've followed my Twitter or X or whatever it is now at all in the last month or so, I've been posting a lot of old content. And one of the pieces of content I posted was the COT at Michigan from 2011 on the old tire model. And long story short, the driving style you had to have to make speed in those cars was completely different. You were just driving on the edge of right rear grip the whole time, just absolutely driving the crap out of the car every lap. And it was extremely fun, but definitely wasn't realistic. So, what it took to get into pro was quite a bit different than what it took to make it through the pro or what's now the contender series and get into DWC or Coke. But yeah, I mean, there wasn't really a huge turnaround between that Phoenix race late in 2011 and the start of the 2012 season. So I just think running in the Pro Series back then with 39 other guys that were basically just as quick as me pushed me to be a better driver, make less mistakes, just clean up a lot of the stuff that I was doing because of just a general lack of experience. Clean that up in that series so that when we started 2012. I was a rookie and I was the youngest guy in the field by some margin, and it honestly remained that way for a couple of years after that. But I just tried to drive beyond my age and not let that be a crutch. Like I'm not going to go out there and wreck somebody and say, "Well, I'm only 13. I don't know enough yet." But I mean, not to wreck people, and when you're driving beyond your skill set. So I definitely tried to keep it clean in 2012. We didn't always have the fastest cars, especially to start the year. It was certainly a struggle at times, but we as a team would always figure out how to maximize what we had, the car we had, and use strategy to our advantage. And that kept us neck and neck with Ray until pretty late in the year when some connection issues, which again you can't control internet stuff. So that cost me some points, and ultimately that made it easy for Ray to close out. But still, looking back on it, a rookie, 14, 15-year-old kid going against Ray Alfalo, who was the best of the best at the time, is something I'm extremely proud of, and definitely just goes to show that all the hard work that went into it, just doing it the right way, coming up through the ranks, definitely paid off in that rookie year.
And I think that's a really interesting point given that the road to the World Championship has so many stages now that doing it right and making sure you're prepared for each step I think it's a really important thing to make sure you do. You talked about the disconnection. I believe that was at Indianapolis, but you bounced back from that the next race with a win and your first
Yep.
eNASCAR win at the New Hampshire Motor Speedway. What were the emotions like there? Because of course you're talking about being such a young kid in the shock of the World Championship competition. How emotional was that, and how gratifying was that to show the speed that you had been able to build?
Yeah, so it was definitely validating because we had some good runs before that, but I can't remember a race where I felt like we had the speed to that point where I could just go out and dominate and win and really show what I was capable of. And going into New Hampshire, like you said, coming off of Indianapolis, where got disconnected and finished really far in the back and lost a bunch of points, I knew that the only path to getting back to championship contention was to either win New Hampshire or score a lot of points, make up points on Ray. And so going into that race, the prep was probably a little bit more extensive than it had been to any point in that year because we knew we had to find the next gear to get that performance. And we found some stuff in the setup leading up to that week that definitely helped us out. I think honestly at that point we didn't really know how good we were until we showed up to the race. Like there was absolutely no way of knowing how fast we were going to be going into there. So when we showed up and qualified, I think our team qualified 1-4, 1-5, which was great for us, me especially. And then we just got into the race, and the thing was just stupid fast. Like just there was nothing that could touch us. I wasn't driving great at times in the race. I remember I was making mistakes, but I was still pulling the field. So the car carried me in that race, but as far as emotions, yeah, I mean it was huge because that was 3, maybe 4 years going back to some of the console stuff of just hard work and dedication to my craft coming to fruition, and again just validation that I could go out there and I could compete with the best. And back then, especially, my whole premise was that you could be on this sim path and translate it into some usable skills that would make your learning curve less when you got into a real car. And I think I proved that a few times over the last several years. But, you know, making that kind of speed, winning that race, I felt at the time was not only a step closer to the championship, but was a step closer to making some people realize that, hey, this kid has some potential and, let's see what he can do in a real car. And ultimately we got there. Not as much as I would have liked, but it was definitely a big help in making it to that point.
Helps if I unmute
There
myself.
you go.
We'll slightly gloss over 2013, not for any particular reason, just because I want to dive
Yeah.
into 2014 when you won your championship, of course. This is before the current playoff format, which I think a lot of people will have their opinions of, and I'm curious what your opinions are on that as well. But talk to us about that season, because you had 9 podiums in the space of 16 races. That's a pretty consistent run throughout a
Yeah.
long championship, but there are also some less good results along the way as well. So you really were able to carry yourself to the championship by having those consistent results in a series which ultimately is still very unpredictable.
Yeah, so heading into 2014, I would say I was mentally at a low as far as just how I felt as a driver in the series and where I felt like my potential was. And looking back on it, it's kind of funny because I think I finished fourth in points in 2013, won 2 races, could have won one or two more. So the performance was good. Like it wasn't as good as 2012, but it wasn't bad. Like I had way worse years after that. So I think it was just me being a kid and I was a little bit fragile and I wasn't mentally strong enough yet. But anyway, so going into 14, I famously said, this is a part-time schedule. I'm going to stop running when I stop having fun. Because back then, we didn't have these real teams that were putting a bunch of money on the line. It wasn't $100,000 championship. It was basically a glorified league. I mean, we took it very seriously, and iRacing did, and NASCAR did too, but there wasn't as much of an obligation to continue to show up if there was nothing in it for you anymore. But anyway, so 14 starts. Didn't do particularly well in the first couple races. I think I started and parked. Auto Club was just running awful, just terrible. So I was like, screw this. I'm not having fun, so I'm going to park. And after that race, I think there were some question marks as to whether or not I was going to show up to Texas the next race after that. We eventually did. had a good run at Texas, finished second or top five, somewhere in there. And then the build changed after Texas, and that's where the whole season changed. So we as a team, J Show Motorsports back then, just this little team of drivers in the series. We didn't have support staff or crew chiefs or spotters. It was just us, just a couple guys making it happen. We got our arms around that build and we're super fast. Ended up winning Pocono, won Dover a couple races later, finished third at Charlotte, and then, like you said, just went on a run to the end of the year that basically saw nothing but success. Got a little bit off toward the last couple races and then picked it back up and were stupid fast again. Ended up winning the championship. So, if we had the system that we have now, I suppose it might have ended up the same way, but we definitely needed the whole season to get our act together and to find speed, to find our cohesion as a team, to be that team that could just continue to rattle off good finishes. So that was a huge year for me, personally, professionally with the series. I feel like I grew a ton with the opportunities that came from that, and just all the exposure I got. Just looking back on it now, it was 9 years ago, and I can't believe that so much time has gone by since then, because it doesn't feel like that. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I love the format that we had back then. Obviously, this series often tries to be a representation of what happens in real life to a certain extent. So I think that's why you see the playoffs now. And I'll sum up my feelings on it with something that Kevin Harvick said at the end of his 2020 run to the championship, where he was eliminated at Martinsville. And he said that the championships don't mean the same thing that they did back then. And what he meant by that was, it's not that the championships don't mean something or that they're not important. The way in which you get to them and the things that you have to do are much different to get there. And I've always been the guy, like we've talked about, where I don't want to wreck cars. I mean, they're virtual cars. Nobody's going to get hurt. It doesn't cost anything, but I just have that mentality of, I don't want to screw myself up. I don't want to screw the other competitors' stuff up too. I don't want to be that guy. So I think being slightly under that limit and not having that mentality of all or nothing probably has hurt me a little bit in the last couple of years with this playoff system we have. But ultimately, what I'm most proud of is the integrity that I had starting my career and the way that I drove starting my career. I never changed that. Didn't matter cars, tracks, formats, who was next to me. I always tried to drive the same way. And yeah, maybe that cost me some over time, but ultimately I can walk away proud of what I did and who I was, and hope to be some sort of model for somebody up and coming, so they can do it the right way as well.
And how many years ago, not how many races ago, how many years ago was your last penalty points in the eNASCAR series?
Yeah, that's a good topic. We love to talk about that at Team Conti. So 6 years, Phoenix 2017, which was fairly early in the season, where I was over aggressive and went against what I typically do, and I drove through Andrew Fayash, who was probably having a career run at that time, and wiped him and a bunch of other people out. So 6 years, I had not caused a wreck in Coke in 6 years, and I'm going to be honest, like at the end of the season, every race, I would say to one of my teammates, Jason Brophy, I was like, Jason, this is going to be the race where I use an incident point. So I'm going to use it on somebody. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And I felt like I hadn't wrecked in so long. I would probably just wreck myself if I ended up hitting something. So anyway, so I ended up not using the points, and that's okay too. But yeah, 6 years, all state, safe hands, driver. I'm going to give it to myself on that one.
And you at that championship year as well, it comes at a pretty crucial time as well, I feel. A couple more years with that same playoff, lack of playoff format, but also the start of the change. Team Conti starts to become a thing, engineers, spotters. The structure, the infrastructure behind the scenes starts to become a little bit more important. As someone that's been around that for so long, talk us through that evolution as well, not just as a driver, but as a team owner as well.
Yeah, so in 14, like I said, it was a small outfit with very little support staff. Moving forward into 15, we started to definitely fall off quite a bit. 16, we were absolutely terrible, which again, looking back on it, if there was ever a time in my pro sim racing career where I should have been at a low, it should have been 2016. But honestly, I think I handled that much better than I did 13. So we knew we had to do something different going into 17. 17 started a little bit slow. And then really that Phoenix race where I got my last penalty point was the turnaround and beginnings of what Team Conti has eventually grown into. Brandon Hastings, who I had worked with at the end of 2014, we got reunited, and he was definitely instrumental in just really putting the organization into our organization, right? So being really structured in our testing plans, introducing a lot of data analysis, getting me to use telemetry when I hadn't used telemetry before that. Just all of those pieces definitely came together, and we didn't make the playoffs in 17. But it's not because we didn't have the performance. We just had some things not go our way. But we were strong at the end of 17, and then really 18 through this last year, Team Conti in any form, whether it was with or without the addition of Nick Ottinger, Matt Busa. We had Logan Clampett with us for a couple of years, brought Jimmy Mullis on this year. I feel like every year that Team Conti was Team Conti in its current form, we were super strong, and I feel like people are always trying to to better us. Like going into the race, they worried about what kind of speed we were going to bring, and ultimately that's the biggest compliment any competitor can pay. So really proud of what became of us. And with that being said, we are still not anywhere near the level of like your Team Redline and all of these road-based teams. I think the oval stuff is run a little bit differently. It's more based on friendships and just guys that you've worked with a long time versus just trying to find outright performance and where are we going to find that guy that can make us better. Like I feel like we tried to make the most of the people we had. We tried to upskill our people as best as possible to bring some corporate terminology into it. And I think overall we did a really good job over the last 6 years in doing that.
Yeah, I'm curious as well. You talk about the likes of Team Redline. We on the road side we've had established team structures for quite a bit now, and you have franchises that have been coming into the eNASCAR world, and Team Conti is now representing a couple of these different franchises. What's that like for the drivers themselves who are having to battle against people that they're also working with, but not necessarily representing one another as teammates?
Yeah, it gets tricky. And like for most of my time at Junior Motorsports, I was paired with somebody who was not part of the Team Conti family. So I think the extent to which you help your front facing teammate, let's say, so your franchise teammate, is help them at a plate track, draft with them. If they're faster than you at any other type of track, just try not to make their life too hard. Give them a break if you can. But it is definitely unique to eNASCAR, the fact that your front facing teammate is more than likely not the guy that you're working with in those 2 weeks leading up to a race to make your setups better, to make your performance better, to drive each other forward. You're doing your own thing separately. Ultimately, your performance matters together in terms of the team championship. But aside from that, there's not a lot of front facing teammates that work with their back end guys. So that's a little bit different. And honestly, I wish that would be different than it is now. I think your teammate on the front should be your teammate on the back. I don't know how you fix that, because how do you force guys to work with each other if they want to stay with their friend group, or if they want to stay with a group of guys that they found success with for multiple years? How do you fix that? I don't know. Obviously contracts and NDAs and all that stuff, I mean, that can certainly do it, but then I think you take something away from what makes eNASCAR unique. So I do think moving forward, there needs to be more of a spotlight brought on those setup building teams, those performance based teams on the back that are kind of just silent, like they're just happening in the background and they're not really brought to light on the broadcasts. Again, I don't know how you make that happen, but I think there's a whole another side to eNASCAR that a lot of people don't get to see, which would be pretty unique if it was actually brought to light.
Yeah, I guess part of the issue becomes that franchises are guaranteed two cars in eNASCAR, right? Whereas there are too many drivers to kind of fill things
Yep.
out. So I guess that's kind of where the splitting up somewhat happens as well. I do also want to kind of get your take, though, on one of the other changes that we've been seeing, specifically in this year, which is, let's say, a shift in the racing itself. Shorter races, introduction of fixed setups at the Chicago Street Course, Talladega, and Pocono. What are your thoughts on all of these things as someone who has been around for so long and gone through so many evolutions of the series as well?
Well, this is definitely a touchy subject for me, and I've made my point very clear internally on how I feel, and I think a lot of the drivers are on the same page with this. Listen, any race can devolve into a circus, right? You can have a 400-mile race that ends up being a crash fest at the end, or you can have a 50-mile race that ends up being a crash fest. Conversely, you can have a good 50-mile race and you can have a good 400-mile race. However, with that being said, when you have extremely short races where the fields are separated first through 40th in qualifying by less than a quarter of a second, when you have a lot of tracks through no fault of iRacing or drivers or anything, you have tracks that are, one lane. There's not a lot of variability in what you can do as a driver to make up spots if you're mired in traffic. When you put all those factors together with a short race, more often than not, the racing is going to turn into a circus. And I was very, very loud at the end of the season about how our races were turning into circuses. I look at Phoenix. I look at the race that was the determining factor in who made the final four. And what I see are 6 cautions in the last 20 laps. What I see are 3 green-white checkers, and still we couldn't finish under green. Now, is that completely the fault of the race length? No. Is that the fault of the car, the track? Not necessarily. I mean, ultimately, it boils down to what we're doing behind the wheel. Like I said, I haven't had an incident point in 6 years, and yeah, I've had to push at times. I've had to make things happen. I've been in must-win situations, but I didn't run into something to get the spot or to get the win. I certainly didn't do it to finish 25th or 30th, and it seems like that's where a lot of these accidents start. So what I'm saying is, yes, I would love to have longer races. I think with longer races, you have more strategy component. You have more time to highlight different drivers in the field. I think it's great from a broadcast and a racing perspective. But it's down to the drivers to make sure that the racing stays clean. Respect that guy around you. Don't make those low probability moves, and if you do, there should be some penalty for it. And I think our current incident system, while it does deter some of the super aggressive moves, I think we saw over the course of this year and honestly last year too that it's not doing enough. So then again, the question is, how do you fix that? Are you imposing monetary fines? Are you taking points away from the championship standings? Do you continue to do suspensions but then plug in a sub driver to really drive that point home for the guy that's sitting on the sidelines that, hey, your car is out there, but you're watching. Get your act together. So I think you have to take all of that into consideration. But at the end of the day, longer races, they're not going to hurt anything. I would love to see that. I would love to see some other format changes as well, which I've talked to some about internally again. But I do think that the series is in a good spot. Can it always be better? Absolutely. Are there things that we can do quickly to transform the series and to clean it up? I think so. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see what 24 has in store. I'll be watching on anxiously, just like everybody else.
You're somewhat preaching to the choir here. I have become known as the arbiter of multi-class etiquette, or whatever you want to call it, on RaceBot TV. So I agree. It's all behind the wheel that the control lies.
That's right.
You talked about the race lengths a little bit. You didn't talk too much about fixed setups. As someone who has
Yeah.
been such a part of the setup building community as well and had to really dive into setups when they started in iRacing, what are your thoughts on fixed setups, especially given that we saw them at a road course, a street course, I guess, at a super speedway and at an intermediate? So we kind of had a bit of a sense for what it's like across multiple different types of races.
Yeah, I think fixed setups definitely have their place in iRacing, in sim racing. I do think they help those who are just trying to come on and experience the driving aspect, who don't necessarily want to compete at a pro level or to really just get to that point where they are trying to be the best of the best. I think fixed races are great for that. In the Coke series or really any type of pro esports sim racing league, I don't really think there's a place for it. And I say that because, as I had mentioned before, the time spread across 40 cars is already so close, and that's on open setups with lots of variation, or I would think lots of variation. So when you plug in a fixed setup and you take that variation away, you've got 40 guys in there that are probably within, a couple percent, right? Like talent wise. So you have no variation in lap time. And as we've seen in real life and in sim racing, when everybody's running the same speed, the racing isn't fluid. It's not dynamic. You don't have organic battles. Like just because the cars are packed up together and nobody gets away from each other doesn't mean the racing is good. So I think in a place like Talladega, it's probably fine. It's going to be a pack race, open or fixed. I think Chicago, it worked okay. I mean, maybe it'd be a little bit different with an open setup, but I think honestly that one worked out fine. Pocono though, like that just, in my opinion, that wasn't a great Pocono race. And again, you saw at the end of it, it was a wreck fest because everybody's on top of each other. You can't pass. So we need to get the drivers away from each other. If you look at the races from 4 or 5 years ago, there's separation 20 laps into a run. You've got 5 seconds between first to 20th. A lot of that comes with, setup variation. It was a different generation of car. We had different tire model back then. So there's a lot of factors that go into that separation. But at the end of the day, we need to get these guys separated so you can actually put your talent on display and not just be bunched up for this whole race. Not able to get away even when you're clearly faster. That's a huge problem that series faces at this point.
Done on a couple of occasions. You're looking forward to seeing what 2024 is going to be about. After more than a decade at this top level, what does the next year look like for you? A lot of people might not know this as well because for so long we've talked about Michael Conti racing at Junior Motorsports, working at Hendrick Motorsports as well. But there's been some changes in your personal life as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I left the dealership world about a year and a half ago and went into the banking industry. So that's been a cool change for me. Definitely a completely different vibe, and I've enjoyed that transition. Just good to get away from cars a little bit too. When you're doing it all day in your main job, and then you're coming home and dealing with cars, yeah, it gets to be kind of old. So that was good. I've enjoyed that, but yeah, I'm trying to enjoy my small laps and having anything competitive to do. I'm sure I'll pick something up again soon, but I've really enjoyed this time to work with the guys at EPI and to expand on doing some one-on-one coaching, just spending a little bit more time with these guys when they're doing their open races and just helping them through that. So it's been really good. It's been laid back. I definitely look forward to seeing how Contender plays out. There are a few guys in there that I know personally, so definitely rooting for them to get back into Coke next year or to get in for the first time. So yeah, definitely a weird spot to be watching from the outside looking in, but honestly, excited to see what happens. Excited to see how I can help, whether it's drivers or series related. I'm open to anything at this point, but we'll see. But I am definitely anxiously waiting to see what happens in 24. And when that first race rolls off at Daytona, I'll definitely be watching with everybody else.
And I see over your shoulder you have a Formula rim sitting behind you as well, so maybe branching out a little bit more on iRacing and just going and doing some fun official racing. Is that something that we may see you in a little bit more of 2023 and 2024?
Yeah, I think so. I've definitely I definitely like what I see with the IMSA stuff and the GTP cars and all of that. They look like a ton of fun, and I used to run those way back in the day. Obviously, completely different now. But if I were to get into anything road racing related, it would probably be that kind of stuff. So we'll see. It's hard for me to do anything halfway at this point because I've been just so used to trying to maximize everything and go into every race feeling like I can win. And I think I'm going to have to shift that mentality a little bit when I go into a completely different discipline. So it'll be a learning curve, but definitely looking forward to seeing what's out there. When you're a pro esports competitor, it's kind of hard to just do fun pickup races because you feel like when you're spending time on that, you could be spending time on testing and making your actual stuff better. So now with that, not a worry anymore. We'll get back into some official racing and see what's out there.
I've been enjoying your throwback posts on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it today.
Yeah.
The Conti files, diving into some of the previous races. You mentioned in the chat today that one of the goals you had with sim racing was to try and develop some skills that were transferable into the real world, and to hopefully maybe get one of those opportunities. Now, unfortunately, things don't always work out that way. As you reflect on 11 plus years in top level sim racing, what are the things, though, that you feel like you've been able to tick off in terms of that achievement? Because I know you've always had some aspirations of jumping into the real world.
Yeah, especially when I was a kid, I definitely wanted to be a race car driver, which, I think a lot of kids share that same dream. And I feel like I got closer than a lot do in some aspects. But yeah, I mean, it definitely helped me get opportunities that wouldn't have been there otherwise if I hadn't been a pro in iRacing. So after the championship, getting to do the whole thing with Yahoo, that sim to reality video shoot that we did with the Richard Petty car out at Vegas, that was pretty cool. Driving a legend car at Southern National for the first time in 15 was super eye opening as well. It was a completely different car that I hadn't even really driven in the sim, so that was completely different. And then this past July, through a partnership with one of my personal sponsors, Martin PC, going up to Oswego, New York, to drive Brian's small block super modified around that place was honestly probably the coolest racing experience I've had so far. Just going up to a track that's so historic. It's had so many big races there. So many big names have raced there. To be able to take a car around there and run at speed and get acclimated pretty quickly and feel well walking away with the kind of lap times that I was doing, and knowing that I could have even done more with some more time. So just being there, feeling the energy, but then also, again, just more validation for myself, knowing I can take what I've learned on iRacing, and while it's not always one to one, could definitely get in a car and feel like I belong and not feel like I'm starting from scratch on that. So I am still a firm believer that iRacing is a path to real life. I think obviously that has to be supplemented with driving in a real car as well alongside the sim prep. But with that being said, with how far iRacing has come and with how much better it is now than it was when I first started many years ago, I think what we're seeing now with a lot of these guys making it into the top 3 NASCAR series is that they cut their teeth on iRacing. They moved up into their local series, did really well, and their path to the top was a lot quicker than it would have been otherwise.
And as you look back on your years, a lot of people will have watched your career, especially in the last few years, as eNASCAR has really blown up and maybe wanted to emulate you. What would you say to a little Michael Conti who was just jumping into the iRacing world? You talked about patience earlier, not wanting to progress too far until you felt ready. What is the key piece of advice that you'd give to a young iRacer?
Yeah. So number one, if you are a young iRacer and people can tell that over voice chat, take your microphone, flip it up, and do not speak, because you will be singled out, right? So don't be the squeaker. That was a big thing that I made sure I didn't do when I first started. Was I stayed off voice chat. I did not want anybody to know my age. I wanted to show, I wanted to prove my driving based on what I was doing on the track, not based on how old people knew or thought I was. So keep it low key, keep it under the radar, and like you said, just have patience. Don't move up to another car before you've mastered what you're in. Master driving the car, master the garage as well. Learn about it, read on it, ask questions, ask people that are the best in that particular car community, because more often than not, in my experience, they're always willing to help if you come to them. Just because you move up a license level doesn't mean there's an obligation to run that next car. So just really focus on making yourself the best you can be early on, practicing really good habits early, because it is much easier to learn when you're first starting than to unlearn a bunch of stuff that you were doing wrong for years later on. So lots of patience. Try not to get discouraged, even though racing, real or virtual, has the highest and lowest of emotions. It's truly a roller coaster, but there's always another race. There's always another opportunity. You are ultimately the one in charge. And as long as you're in control of what you're doing, you'll probably end up doing pretty well on here.
I think it's pretty good advice in general. Just stay off voice chat. Nothing good comes from being on
We
voice
don't
chat.
need voice
Don't
chat. Get rid of it. We just need text chat. That's all we had back in the day. There was no voice chat. I think voice chat's terrible. I say we get rid of it, but I'm probably in the minority. So that's my hot take.
I think a vocal minority. I think that is probably the way to look at it. Don't forget raceepi.com. That's where you can check out Elite Performance Industries and also grab one of these really delightful Michael Conti t-shirts, which are on sale. Michael, thank you so much for everything you've done for the sim racing community and will continue to do. It has indeed been great across of your eNASCAR career, and we can't wait to see what comes next.
I appreciate you guys having me. Thanks so much.
Really cool to be able to dive into the world of eNASCAR, and we'll have a few more of these deep dives in the next coming weeks as we build up to the 2023 Simi Awards. For now, it's time to say goodbye. For the entire team behind the scenes at VCO, for Mike Yao alongside myself, Arjuna Kankipati, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time in the VCO Esports studio. So long, and race on.